Most men ebb and flow in the wretchedness between the fear of death and the hardships of life. They are unwilling to live, and yet they do not know how to die. Stoicism is characteristically a philosophy of resilience, bravery, and above all else, a calm mind in the face of extreme adversity. These characteristics are perhaps best represented in Seneca the Younger, a Stoic philosopher, playwright, statesman, and even an exiled felon. With a resume this varied, Seneca's life presents to us a clear look at how one may apply the methods of Stoicism in the face of hardship. Seneca's story starts at the beginning of the millennium, when Seneca, only a young boy at the time, joined his father in a move to Rome. The Roman Empire was at the height of its power, growing day by day, an unrivaled global superpower of industry and military might. And at the heart of it all was Rome itself, a gilded city, flourishing with trade, enterprise, art, and culture. This is where Seneca would receive his education. Educated by various philosophers, including Attalus the Stoic, a philosopher and teacher from Greece. Attalus' Stoic influence was profound on the young Seneca. Seneca would receive lectures on the danger and vice that greed and a lust for power could present. Seneca, who had a privileged life in Rome, would often leave the classroom, wishing himself to be poorer, such that he could emulate the ideals of resilience and equanimity outlined by his tutor. Seneca suffered ill health throughout most of his life. As a child, a near-fatal combination of asthma and tuberculosis would see Seneca moving away from his mother and father in Rome to join his aunt and uncle in Egypt. His aunt and her husband, Gaius Galerius, Rome's prefect or governor to Egypt, took Seneca in. The political insights drawn from this stay was of enormous influence upon Seneca. His uncle Gaius was charged with overseeing the stability and expansion of what many agree to be the greatest ancient human civilization, the Roman Empire. Seneca's recovery in this environment was propelled by his enthusiasm for public life, and as a young man of better health, he would soon return to Rome, somewhat naively entering into a career of politics. The political landscape of ancient Rome was dangerous and conspiratorial. You were only as safe as your political adversaries wanted you to be. Seneca's political career advanced quickly, soon becoming a quaestor, an elected Roman official. As an excellent orator, he became an immediate success within the Senate. The Roman Senate, which in this time was comprised of a number of important political celebrities, was second in both power and influence to only one man, the Emperor. The Emperor had full control of the city and the vast empire at large. By all accounts, the ancient world would bend to the will of the Emperor. The emperor of this time was Caligula, a hedonic and cruel emperor. Caligula was less of an administrator and more of a crazed dictator who would openly mock the democratic and imperial process. Caligula believed himself to be a god with supreme powers. He would order Roman senators to worship him and publicly humiliate themselves, taking senators' wives as concubines and threatening to make his own horse a consul, the senior-most position in the Senate. There are reported instances of Caligula publicly wearing ceremonial dress, adorning himself with precious gemstones, and even the breastplate of Alexander the Great. The juxtaposition of the cruel and entitled leader flaunting his wealth and status further maligned him to the public. Caligula was afraid of any power that could oppose him. He was terrified during storms, believing Zeus was finally exacting his might against him. And Caligula was as vain as he was cruel. He would order the execution of anyone he believed to be a political threat. And as such, Caligula was unimpressed that Seneca's success in the Senate had earned him popularity amongst the people of Rome, and without provocation, Caligula would order Seneca's execution. However, because Seneca's lifelong poor health persisted, the task seemed foolish. The execution of a terminally ill man would have seemed redundant, even to Caligula. Caligula agreed that Seneca's failing health would be his death sentence. Caligula's tormenting of the city would eventually catch up with him, with his own imperial guard, the very men sworn to protect him, killing him in his home. The same guard who had killed Caligula had now installed their own emperor, Claudius, Caligula's own uncle. Claudius was an unlikely emperor. With no military experience, he had been tormented his whole life for his physical disabilities and his stutter. His rise to power had been unpredictable. Many historians believe that this made Claudius an excellent puppet for the Praetorian Guard. However, relative to other recent leaders, Claudius's administration was far more productive. If Caligula had been reckless, his uncle was far more calculating. Claudius was cunning and was well aware that the circumstance of his ascension underlined that the throne on which he sat was more or less a target. Since his status as emperor had circumvented the democratic process, Claudius took extreme measures through bribery and an excessive payroll to ensure that those directly involved in his safety, such as the military and guards, were sufficiently compensated. The installation of an emperor by military interest was heavily scrutinized, and Claudius's reputation suffered. One such vocal critic was Seneca, who was appalled to see the circumvention of the democratic process, and in what many historians believe to be a more complex conspiracy to end Seneca's political career, Claudius and his first wife Messalina alleged that Seneca was having an affair with their niece, Julia Livilla. The emperor sentenced Seneca to death, and Julia to exile and forced starvation. Seneca's death sentence was subsequently commuted to exile, which would serve as a more effective and lasting example of what would befall political dissidents of Rome. Seneca's exile was to the barren island of Corsica. Exile was among the most severe punishments available to an emperor. Complete isolation and nearly impossible living conditions, Seneca retreated into his own mind, where he found the solace of the Stoic lessons he had once been taught. Stoicism and his childhood teacher Attalus' influence steeled Seneca's resolve. In desolation, Seneca found peace. In his exile, Seneca composed a series of Stoic works, including a series of letters to his distraught mother, who was tortured at losing her son to such harsh conditions. His consolations read, "Let others use soft measures and caresses. I have determined to do battle with your grief, and I will dry those weary and exhausted eyes, which already, to tell you the truth, are weeping more from habit than from sorrow. I will effect this cure, if possible, with your good will. If you disapprove of my efforts or dislike them, then you must continue to hug and fondle the grief which you have adopted as a survivor of your son. All vices sink into our whole being, if we do not crush them before they gain a footing. And in like manner, these sad, pitiable, and discordant feelings end by feeding upon their own bitterness, until the unhappy mind takes a sort of morbid delight in grief." Seneca's consolations to his mother are all the more profound when his dire circumstance and a near constant threat of death befall him. Willing the strength inside himself to mitigate the pain in others is nothing short of heroic. Seneca's exile continued. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and months became years. And then, finally, after 8 years of torment, Seneca receives a notice. Caligula, the mad emperor who had been executed by his own guard, had a sister. Agrippina, who had given birth to a boy, now wished the young child to have a well-known public figure and intellectual as his tutor. She has personally requested Seneca, and so, by imperial demand, he is called back from exile and placed back into the immediate service of the palace. Seneca's return to Rome and the opulence of palace life was held in direct contrast to the harsh conditions of Corsica. This perhaps best underlines the efforts one must take to apply the methods of Stoicism when a life of abundance and luxury are available to you. From this contradiction, Seneca composed a series of famous letters to his friend Lucilius. The letters offered the Stoics advice on a large number of many topics. A quote from one such letter reads, "Our luxuries have condemned us to weakness. We have ceased to be able to do the thing that we have long declined to do." Seneca's tutoring of Agrippina's son included a vast education in what would aid him in a career in public life. This dynamic of a philosopher tutoring a child of noble blood was an attempt to model Seneca and Attalus, or even Alexander the Great and Aristotle. Public speaking, logic, administration, with an emphasis on Stoic virtues. However, Nero's mother refused to let philosophy be included in the child's curriculum. She was the sister to the murdered Emperor Caligula and niece to the current Emperor Claudius. And Agrippina, just like Seneca, had been exiled herself under the condemnation of adultery and conspiracy. In her exile, only a young woman at the time, she had time to reflect on the politics and scheming that had led to her demise. She had been ordered to the barren island of Pantateria for years. It was the same island where her own mother had been exiled and subsequently killed. Her father, Germanicus Caesar, had been Rome's greatest general, expanding Rome's empire against the barbarian Germanic tribes. He was long regarded as Rome's own Alexander the Great, immortalized in song and statue for his bravery and his physique. Despite his popularity and the good he'd done for Rome, he'd been assassinated by poisoning for political motives. Her brother, Caligula, the mad emperor, had also been assassinated for political motive, and now it was likely that Agrippina would die too, meeting the same end as the rest of her family. However, her uncle Claudius had always been fond of Agrippina since she was a child. As newly appointed emperor, he recalled her to Rome, saving her from an almost certain death. In her exile, Agrippina's husband abandoned her, leaving her for dead. He left her with nothing but a noble bloodline and a son. In the years that followed Agrippina's return, her political ambitions became clear. She would marry a wealthy Roman elite and subsequently have him killed, inheriting his fortune. In that same year, she persuaded her own uncle to overturn the laws against incest. She would marry her own uncle, the Emperor Claudius, who was 30 years her senior, and becoming more and more frail by the day. The Roman public did not approve and were appalled by the marriage, and yet Agrippina took great efforts to remove any contest, killing Claudius's previous betrothed, ordering her suicide. Agrippina would leverage the love her new husband had for her, manipulating the marriage as a way to slowly gain more influence over Claudius. Agrippina convinced her new husband to deny his own son the succession of emperor and to give the title of heir to her own son. The emperor, whose health was rapidly deteriorating, agreed and adopted her child, changing his name to Nero. Agrippina acted swiftly to ensure the ascension of her son went unchallenged, personally appointing members of the Praetorian Guard who had been loyal to her family. She installed the unknown Afranius Burrus as prefect and commander. Agrippina had slowly built a service of loyal guards and servicemen so that when Claudius died, her son, Nero, became emperor, unchallenged at the age of 16. The child's appointment as emperor was the culmination of all of Agrippina's ambitions. By all accounts, Nero was the product of years of Agrippina's conspiring and political meddling, scheming, and waiting. Now, through controlling her son, she had control of the empire. This proxy dictatorship held by the boy's mother concerned Seneca and Afranius Burrus. As his former tutor, Seneca now served as Nero's primary advisor. Agrippina believed that by rescuing Seneca from his exile that he would be loyal to her political scheming. In the same vein, she believed that her appointment of Burrus to prefect of the Praetorian Guard would ensure his loyalty to Agrippina, but she had been mistaken. These men were not enticed by the title and honour of their position. These men were loyal only to Rome and its people. Their lives and careers had been dedicated to its prosperity, and despite the risks it posed to their own lives, Seneca and Burrus had no interest in maintaining the status quo and surrendering control of the city to Agrippina. Seneca and Burrus encouraged Nero to accept the full responsibility of the position and to prevent his mother from controlling him, and by extension, the empire. Seneca and Burrus would guide the young emperor, becoming Nero's most highly valued policy advisors. And due to their influence, Nero's reign began as a success. A flood of new policies were installed, both moderate and highly popular with the citizenry. The regime banned public games and contests with any bloodshed or cruelty. The new empire prohibited the death penalty, reduced taxes for citizens, and most progressively for its time, allowed servants to bring civil complaints to the courts against unjust or cruel masters. Nero even forgave the writers who had slandered him, preventing secret trials from taking place, signalling what felt for the first time a new wave of modesty and temperance from the emperor. Massive investments into public infrastructure, food security, and the arts were put in place. Rome had entered a period of stability and prosperity. Agrippina had been furious at losing her status and control of the empire. Historical accounts report she threatened to remove Nero and restore Claudius's lineage and install his son as emperor. Other accounts state Agrippina attempted to seduce Nero while he was intoxicated. Nero became terrified of his mother, and despite Seneca and Burrus's protests, had her killed. Nero would order his mother's boat to be capsized, drowning her in the ocean. Nero revelled in the independence and defiance of his advisors, beginning a frenzy of bloodshed and rule by an iron fist. In the years that followed the murder of his own mother, Nero's cruelty grew. He murdered his brother and killed his own wife while she was still pregnant. He burned down an entire section of Rome just so he could build a new palace in the location of his own preference. He mercilessly persecuted the early Christians whose religion he believed to be a threat to his own power. He justified the religious persecution by blaming the Christians for the aforementioned fire. However, even direct historical accounts acknowledge this to be evidently false. He directly ordered the execution of the disciples of Jesus, St. Paul and St. Peter. St. Peter's execution was to be completed by crucifixion. St. Peter believed himself unworthy to die in the same manner as Christ, and insisted he be crucified hanging upside down. Nero obliged in the horrific death. Seneca was distraught at the undoing of his years of mentorship and counsel. Nero was ruling contrary to the years of the Stoics' instruction. The vision of Nero becoming a great and just emperor was lost to the memories of his own heritage. To that of Caligula or Claudius, Seneca attempted to retire from his position as Nero's advisor, which Nero refused. Nero would later kill his former counsel and advisor, Burrus, who he believed in his paranoia to be plotting against him. At the loss of his closest colleague, Seneca acknowledged his own death at the hands of Nero to be inevitable. Seneca, at home surrounded by friends and family, would be visited by the palace guard, serving him notice that his suicide had been ordered by the Emperor Nero. Seneca, since birth, had endured failing health, separation from his parents and friends in Rome, political persecution, exile, and the persistent threat of death from sociopathic leadership. And yet despite this, Seneca maintained a Stoic disposition, stood tall against a lifetime of what one could only characterize as severe and consistent suffering. Through an internal and unwavering strength, he wrote some of the greatest philosophy contributed to mankind, operating nobly and honestly in an environment where there was every incentive not to. And now, confronted with death, Seneca's resolve was just as strong. He accepted the demand, and seeing his friends and family crying, he reproached them. Where are your maxims of philosophy? Or the preparation of so many years' study against evils to come? Who knew not of Nero's cruelty? After a mother's and brother's murder, nothing remains but the destruction of the guardian and a tutor. Seneca, unshaken, picked up the blade and opened his arteries. Due to his already poor health, death came slowly. He stepped into a steam bath, where the vapours slowed his breath. There he spoke his final words. Thus, I make a libation to Jupiter, the deliverer. A final wish that Rome and the world would one day be free of Nero and leaders like him. Seneca's life and death serves as a light, a guide for Stoic ideals. To quote Seneca, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future. Not to amuse ourselves with either hopes or fears, but to rest satisfied with what we have, which is sufficient for he that is so that wants nothing." The greatest blessings of mankind are within us, and within our reach. A wise man is content with his lot, whatever that may be, without wishing for what he has not.